The night I saw her with another man was the night my world shattered. Sitting in my car outside the hotel, I watched them walk in hand, laughing in a way that used to belong to us. My chest felt hollow, my fists pounded the steering wheel, and my heart broke into pieces. This wasn't the life we had built together. It was a betrayal by someone I no longer recognized. In that moment, it wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of the version of me that believed I could fix something so profoundly broken. It was my turning point. As much as it hurt, it also set me free. But before we go deeper into this story, think about moments in your own life where everything changed. What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below. If you're here for these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. In the summer of 2013, my life seemed to be on the right track. I had a solid job, a great group of friends, and a clear vision for my future. What I didn't realize was that everything was about to change. It all began at a casual cookout hosted by a mutual friend. Among the crowd, she stood out immediately, radiant, confident, and effortlessly articulate. She had a way of commanding attention without even trying. When we started talking, the noise around us seemed to fade. Her sharp wit and contagious laugh were magnetic, pulling me in like nothing I'd ever experienced. Meeting her felt like finding the missing piece of my life. Later that night, she confessed that she felt the same. "I never thought I'd meet someone so grounded and refreshing," she said, flashing a smile that made me feel like I could take on the world. From that day forward, we were inseparable. Within weeks, we were spending nearly every free moment together. The chemistry was undeniable, but it wasn't just physical, it was deeper than that. We talked about everything: our dreams, our pasts, and the lives we wanted to build together. 18 months later, we stood hand in hand, exchanging vows. Our early married life was a dream come true. We moved into a spacious apartment and began saving for a home, brimming with plans for a future that seemed bright and limitless. Those first few years were filled with passion and shared ambition. She thrived in her corporate career while I excelled in mine, often traveling but always eager to come home to her. We were a team, and I believed nothing could come between us. But life, as I would learn, has a way of testing even the strongest foundations. By 2016, the honeymoon phase had faded, but I thought that was normal. Life was busier than ever. My role as a director of a technical sales company meant frequent travel, while her career had skyrocketed, demanding long hours and high-stakes projects. We were both ambitious, and I truly believed we were building something solid. At first, I didn't mind her late nights at the office. "It's just temporary," she'd say, giving me a tired but affectionate smile. "Once I'm established, things will calm down." But they didn't. If anything, they intensified. Late nights at work became routine, and her absence on weekends became more noticeable. Work outings started happening with alarming frequency. First once a month, then once a week, and eventually even more often. I tried to adapt, convincing myself it was just a phase. After all, I wasn't always home either, traveling for work every few weeks. But when I was home, I craved the connection we once had. One evening, as she breezed in after another late night, I tried to broach the subject. "Can we talk about how distant we've become?" I asked, keeping my voice as calm as I could despite the frustration building inside me. She barely glanced at me as she took off her shoes. "You're gone too much to notice," she replied curtly. "I'm just trying to make this work." Her words stung more than I expected. I felt defensive and guilty at the same time, wondering if my frequent travel was the real problem. "If it's me being away, I can cut back," I offered, desperate to salvage what felt like was slipping away. But the conversation went nowhere. It spiraled into a circular argument that left us both drained and no closer to a resolution. Looking back, those arguments were a warning sign. They weren't just about long hours or travel schedules. They were about the widening chasm between us. Small irritations began to creep in. She'd snap at me for forgetting to unload the dishwasher. I'd grow annoyed when she constantly checked her phone during dinner. Even our intimate moments grew few and far between. By the time I saw her with another man, the cracks in our marriage had become impossible to ignore. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder, was there something I could have done differently? Or were we destined to fall apart no matter what? Let me know what you think. Do you believe there's always a way to save a relationship, or are some fractures too deep to repair? I couldn't ignore the rejection I felt every time she brushed off my attempts to reconnect with vague excuses about being tired or stressed. It wasn't just the words she used but the tone, as if my efforts to bring us closer were inconveniences rather than acts of love. On the weekends when I wasn't traveling, I tried to make up for the growing distance between us. I planned thoughtful date nights, cooked her favorite meals, and even picked up small gifts to remind her of how much she meant to me. But more often than not, she'd cancel with a hurried excuse about last-minute work commitments. The turning point came one Friday evening. I had planned an elaborate dinner, a rare opportunity for us to reconnect. I set the table with candles, her favorite wine, and a meal I knew she loved. My excitement to have an uninterrupted evening together was palpable, but when she walked in, she barely glanced at the effort I'd put into it. "I'm sorry," she said hurriedly, barely meeting my eyes as she tossed her bag on the counter. "I have to meet some coworkers tonight. It's important." Something snapped inside me. "Do you even care that I went out of my way to do this for us?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. She sighed, looking more annoyed than apologetic. "You're overreacting. It's just one night." "It's not just one night, though," I fired back, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "It's every night. When was the last time we spent any real time together?" She rolled her eyes, an act that cut deeper than any words could. "Don't start this again," she said dismissively, her tone sharp and final. Her words stung more than I could express. I let the argument drop, but the damage was already done. That night, as I cleaned up the uneaten meal, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her, and that maybe, just maybe, she had already decided I wasn't worth holding on to. As 2017 arrived, the cracks in our relationship only deepened. Her late nights became more frequent, as did our arguments. But what hurt the most wasn't the fights, it was the silence. The effortless conversations we used to share had been replaced by strained exchanges or long stretches of quiet. I found myself retreating into my own thoughts, questioning everything. Was I being unreasonable? Was I failing her as a husband? Or was there something else going on? Something she wasn't telling me? It was then I started noticing things that didn't add up. A perfume I didn't recognize clung to her clothes some nights. Her defensiveness grew sharper every time I asked about her work outings. She began keeping her phone closer than ever, even placing it under her pillow at night. My gut told me something was wrong, but I kept brushing it aside, telling myself she was just stressed and I was overthinking things. Deep down, though, I couldn't shake the unease that was building inside me. Our marriage, once brimming with passion and shared dreams, now felt like a house of cards teetering on the edge of collapse. And no matter how hard I tried to hold it together, it felt as though the foundation was crumbling beneath us. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. It was a cold February evening in 2018 when the life I thought I knew unraveled in front of me. That night started like so many others. My wife breezed through the door, her work bag slung over her shoulder and exhaustion etched across her face. She mumbled something vague about a late meeting, barely glancing in my direction before retreating to her room to catch up on emails. I wanted to believe her. I really did. I wanted to trust her. But her detachment had been gnawing at me for months, and every unspoken word between us felt like another brick in the wall dividing us. The unease that had been building for so long turned into full-blown suspicion the very next day. While helping her unload groceries from the car, something caught my eye, a flash of pink tucked beneath the passenger seat. My hand instinctively reached for it, and when I pulled it out, my heart sank. It was a bra, her bra. I recognized it immediately because she always bought the same brand. But why was it there, tucked beneath the seat, hidden like some shameful secret? My stomach churned as I tried to find a reasonable explanation. Maybe it fell out of her gym bag, I thought. But no, she hadn't been to the gym in weeks. I walked back into the house, the bra concealed behind my back, and found her in the kitchen, casually unpacking the groceries. She looked up and smiled, her tone light and playful. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she joked, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I forced a laugh, shaking my head. "Just tired," I muttered, dropping the bags on the counter and slipping the bra into my pocket. She didn't question me, and I didn't confront her. My heart was pounding too hard to form coherent words, and my mind was racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. That night, I barely slept. Every late night, every perfunctory excuse, every half-hearted kiss played on a loop in my head. Was I losing my mind? Or was I standing on the edge of a truth I wasn't ready to face? The next evening, she left for yet another work outing. Her goodnight nothing more than a glance in my direction. The moment she stepped out the door, I made my move. I grabbed my work phone, a second phone I rarely used, and slipped it into the backseat of her car. I didn't want to track her, but I felt like I had no choice. My gut screamed for answers, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The blue dot on my screen showed her heading downtown to a bar she'd mentioned in passing before. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white as I followed her car. I felt like a man I didn't recognize, desperate, furious, heartbroken, all at once. I parked across the street from the bar, my eyes scanning every face that passed through its doors. Nearly an hour later, I saw her. She stepped out of the bar laughing with a man I had never seen before. He was tall, polished, and exuded an effortless confidence. My chest tightened as he placed his hand on the small of her back, guiding her to his car. Then, it happened. He leaned in and kissed her. A kiss so familiar it made my heart shatter. I wanted to scream, to jump out of my car and demand answers, but I was paralyzed by the weight of the betrayal. I watched as they climbed into his car and drove off, numb to everything except the pain tearing through me. I followed them, each mile feeling like another dagger in my chest. 10 minutes later, they pulled into a hotel parking lot. They stepped out, holding hands, and walked inside with the ease of people who had done this countless times before. I sat there, alone in my car with the engine still running, as my world crumbled around me. My fists pounded against the steering wheel, tears streaming down my face. This wasn't just infidelity. It was the death of everything I thought we were. The person I loved, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had become a stranger. I couldn't stay there. Watching them disappear into that hotel was more than I could bear. I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind replaying every moment of our marriage, searching for signs I might have missed. Was it the late nights? The quick, distracted kisses? The way her eyes had started to lose their warmth? A part of me wanted to blame myself, to wonder if I had somehow driven her to this. But deep down, I knew this wasn't my fault. Eventually, I ended up at a quiet tavern on the outskirts of town. The bartender, a kind woman with a warm smile, asked me if I wanted to talk. I couldn't bring myself to say anything, so I just nodded and ordered a drink. As I sat there in that dimly lit bar, staring into my glass, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the end? Or was it the beginning of something I couldn't yet imagine? How do you rebuild when the foundation you trusted most has been destroyed? I managed a bitter smile when the bartender commented that I looked like someone had taken the wind out of my sails. "You could say that," I replied, ordering a drink to distract myself from the turmoil brewing inside. Before I knew it, a man sitting nearby struck up a conversation. There was something about his calm demeanor that encouraged me to open up, and soon, I was spilling everything. Every betrayal, every unanswered question, every moment of doubt that had consumed me. He listened quietly, nodding occasionally, and when I finally paused, he spoke with an air of certainty that cut through my fog of despair. "You've got two choices," he said firmly. "You can let this break you, or you can let it set you free. It's up to you." His words hit me like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay in limbo. I had to confront her, no matter how much it hurt. When I got home, she was already in bed, her back turned to me as if she had nothing to hide. The next morning, as we sat across from each other at the breakfast table, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me for months. "Are you having an affair?" Her reaction was immediate but calculated. She froze for a split second before scoffing. "You're being ridiculous. There's nothing going on." Her denial cut through me like a knife. But the sharpest pain came from the way she dismissed my concerns, as if my suspicions were an insult to her integrity. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but I swallowed my anger and nodded, letting her believe she had convinced me. Inside, though, I was done. I had seen enough to know the truth, and there was no going back. The days that followed were a blur of fury, despair, and disbelief. I didn't confront her again, unwilling to endure more gaslighting and hollow denials. Her dismissiveness stung every time she left for another work outing, and I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the image of her walking into that hotel. Our once vibrant marriage felt like a shell of its former self, a hollow pretense that suffocated me more with each passing day. One evening, after yet another dinner eaten in icy silence, I found myself at the same bar where I had met Ree. He was there again, sitting in his usual spot, his calm presence grounding me in a way I desperately needed. I spilled everything: the weight of her betrayal, the suffocating silence that had taken over our home, the growing realization that I couldn't fix this alone. Ree listened with the same quiet patience as before, taking a long sip of his beer before speaking. "You don't owe her anything," he said, his voice low but resolute. "She made her choice. Now make yours." His words hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time, I realized I did have a choice. I didn't have to stay. I didn't have to endure this. "I just want peace," I said, my voice breaking under the weight of my confession. Ree nodded, his expression softening. "Then take it. Look, I've got a trailer on my land. It's not fancy, but it's livable. You're welcome to it if you need a place to clear your head." The idea of leaving, of starting over in a quiet, detached space, felt impossible at first. But that night, as I stared at the empty space beside me on the couch, it began to feel like my only option. Staying wasn't about love anymore. It was about fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what leaving would mean. But staying was killing me, and I realized I couldn't let that happen. Quietly, I began making plans. While she was at work, I packed my belongings bit by bit, taking only the essentials and moving them into the trailer Ree had offered. It was a humble space, surrounded by mountains that seemed to breathe life back into me. I found solace in the stillness, spending hours outside, letting the crisp air wash over me as I sorted through my thoughts. One afternoon, as I unpacked a box of books, Ree stopped by. He leaned against the doorframe, watching me for a moment before speaking. "You look lighter already," he said with a small grin. "Like you're finally breathing again." I smiled back. "It's not easy, but yeah, I feel like I'm starting to." "Good," he said, his tone firm but kind. "Don't let her drag you down anymore. You deserve better. Remember that." His words stayed with me, a quiet affirmation that I clung to as I began to rebuild. Back at the apartment, her behavior shifted slightly. She seemed to sense my withdrawal, softening her tone and occasionally trying to engage me in small talk. But I saw through it. She wasn't trying to fix our marriage. She was trying to maintain the status quo. One night, as she was getting ready to leave again, she asked casually, "Where are you going?" When she saw me grab my jacket. "Meeting up with some friends," I said, my voice neutral. She hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "You've never mentioned them before. Who are they?" I shrugged, using her own words against her. "You wouldn't know them, and you wouldn't enjoy the shop talk." Her mouth tightened, but she didn't press further. In that moment, I knew I had taken my first real step toward freedom. I asked, catching my breath as I approached. She looked up, her face a mix of relief and embarrassment. "That would be amazing," she said with a sheepish grin. I thought I could handle this, but clearly, I overestimated myself. I knelt beside her and got to work, chatting as I fixed the tire. Her name was Lily, and she had recently moved to the area to escape her own share of city chaos. As we talked, I couldn't help but notice how her energy felt so light, so genuine, so unburdened by the weight of the past. When the tire was fixed, she insisted on treating me to coffee at a nearby cafe as a thank you. That afternoon, sitting in the sunlit patio of a small cafe, something unexpected happened. For the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed, genuinely, deeply. Lily had a way of finding humor in the mundane, and her warmth was infectious. We exchanged numbers, promising to meet up for a hike sometime, and as I walked back to my trailer, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years: hope. The following weeks blended into a rhythm of rebuilding and rediscovery. Lily and I started hiking together regularly, and our conversations became deeper, more personal. She shared her own story of heartbreak and resilience, and I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone else. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people finding solace in each other's company. Ree noticed the change in me one evening as we sat by the fire pit. "You're smiling more," he said, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "It looks good on you." I shrugged, feeling a little embarrassed but also grateful. "I think I'm starting to let go," I admitted. "Not just of her, but of everything that kept me tied to that life. It's freeing." "That's the point," Ree said, raising his beer in a silent toast. "You're not just surviving anymore. You're living." As summer turned into fall, the mountains transformed into a tapestry of golds and reds, their beauty a constant reminder of the cycles of change and renewal. I found peace in the simplicity of my new life, in the long hikes, quiet mornings, and shared moments with Lily. She never pressed me for more than I was ready to give, and I found comfort in her patience and understanding. One crisp October evening, as we sat on the deck wrapped in blankets, watching the stars, she turned to me with a soft smile. "You've come a long way, you know," she said. "You're not the same person I met on that trail." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words. "It's taken time," I said, my voice steady, "but I think I'm finally starting to see who I want to be. And for the first time, I'm not scared of what comes next." As the stars glimmered above us, I realized that my journey wasn't just about leaving her or the life we'd built. It was about finding myself, about rediscovering what it meant to truly live. And in that moment, surrounded by the stillness of the mountains and the warmth of Lily's presence, I knew I was finally free. I sipped my coffee, enjoying the morning calm when the bell above the door jingled, announcing a new arrival. I glanced up instinctively and froze. Standing in the doorway was my ex-wife. Her hair was different, shorter, and her posture was less confident than I remembered, but it was undeniably her. My stomach twisted as memories of betrayal and heartbreak rushed back. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on me. For a moment, she hesitated, and then, as if gathering her courage, she walked over. "Paul," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I thought that was you." I nodded, setting down my coffee. "It is. What are you doing here?" Her eyes flickered to the seat across from me. "Mind if I sit?" Part of me wanted to refuse, to guard the peace I had worked so hard to build. But curiosity got the better of me, and I gestured for her to sit. She placed her bag on the floor and folded her hands on the table. "I didn't expect to see you here. I heard you moved out this way." "I did," I replied simply. "Needed a fresh start." She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the table. "I wanted to apologize, Paul, for everything. I was selfish and I hurt you in ways I can't take back. I know that. I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I'm sorry." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. I studied her face, searching for sincerity, and what I saw surprised me: genuine remorse. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The anger I once felt wasn't there anymore, but neither was the need for her apology. "I appreciate that," I said finally, my tone calm but firm. "It wasn't easy, but I've moved on. I've built something better for myself out here." She looked up, her eyes glistening. "I'm glad, Paul. You deserve that. I wanted you to know I regret what I did. Every day." I nodded again, letting her words settle. "It's in the past now. I've let it go." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the years between us filling the space. Then, with a faint smile, she stood. "Thank you for listening. I'll leave you to your coffee." As she walked out of the shop, a strange sense of closure washed over me. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated, just free. Her apology, though unexpected, wasn't something I needed to move forward. I had already done that on my own. Later that day, As I stood on a familiar ridge watching the sunset cast its golden light over the mountains, I felt a profound sense of clarity. Life had brought me full circle, offering me the closure I didn't know I needed. The mountains had been my sanctuary, a place where I had pieced myself back together, and now they felt like home in a way no other place ever had. That evening, as I shared a quiet meal with Emma, I found myself smiling at her warmth and easy laughter. She had become a light in my life, not as a replacement for what I had lost, but as a reminder of what I had gained. A life of peace, authenticity, and genuine connection. As the fire crackled softly beside us, Emma glanced at me with curiosity. "What's on your mind, mountain man?" "Just how far I've come," I replied, my voice steady. "And how much more there is to look forward to." She smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You deserve it, Paul. Every bit of it." Looking out at the quiet night sky, I realized she was right. I had found something I never thought I would: healing, hope, and a life worth living. The late afternoon sun bathed the mountains in hues of amber and lavender as I stood on the ridge, the cool wind carrying a stillness that felt almost sacred. I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. A year ago, I had left everything behind: a marriage, a city, and a version of myself that had been defined by someone else's choices. Now, standing in the quiet embrace of the mountains, I felt whole in a way I never thought possible. Her final email had arrived a few days earlier. It was filled with apologies, reflections, and a plea for reconciliation. She spoke of therapy, growth, and regret. It was an acknowledgement of her actions and an attempt to mend what had been broken. I read it carefully, not out of longing but out of respect. When I crafted my response, it was with a steady hand and a clear heart. "Thank you for your honesty. I'm glad you're finding healing, but I've moved on. I wish you peace and happiness, but our paths will not cross again." As I pressed send, there was no turmoil, no second-guessing, just a quiet acceptance. I realized that closure doesn't always come from answers or apologies. Sometimes it comes from within, from deciding that your peace matters more than the chaos of the past. That morning, I hiked my favorite trail, a path that twisted through dense evergreens before opening to the ridge where I now stood. The view below stretched endlessly: rolling valleys, jagged peaks, and a sky painted in colors too vivid to describe. It was a reminder of the vastness of life, of how small our struggles can feel against such grandeur. I had learned so much in this year of rebuilding. Betrayal had taught me the power of resilience. Solitude had shown me the strength in finding yourself. And the mountains, they had been my greatest teacher, whispering truths in their silence. The most important lesson I'd learned was this: your worth is not defined by the choices of others. Betrayal is painful, yes, but it doesn't have to break you. It can be the fire that forges a stronger, more grounded version of yourself. Seeking revenge or dwelling on bitterness only traps you in the past. True freedom comes from letting go, from choosing to live fully in the present and building a future where your happiness and growth take precedence. As I stood there, the wind brushing my face, I thought about her and all the pain she had caused. I didn't feel anger or resentment, just a distant sympathy for someone who hadn't yet found the peace I now held. I spoke aloud, my voice carried away by the breeze, as if sharing with the mountains themselves. True freedom doesn't come from seeking vengeance, but from choosing to let go. Those who hurt us will face their own reckoning, not because we demand it, but because time and karma ensure it. Forgiveness isn't about excusing their actions. It's about setting ourselves free from the chains of the past. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in gold and purple, I felt the profound weight of that truth. Letting go wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It wasn't about her. It was about me, about reclaiming my life and living it on my terms. I began my descent down the mountain, each step lighter than the last. The life I was building was mine, shaped by my choices and guided by the clarity I had fought so hard to find. I smiled as the scent of pine filled the air, a quiet joy swelling in my chest. I had left the shadows of the past behind, and for the first time in years, I was walking toward the light. What do you think about the choices Paul made throughout his journey? Is true peace found in forgiving and letting go? Or is there another path to healing after betrayal? How do we balance holding others accountable with prioritizing our own well-being? Let's discuss.